What would happen if a 6-year-old pointed to a judge and claimed, "You're my dad?" The courtroom was unprepared for such a revelation. It became unnervingly quiet, a stillness so profound that every sound, from the shuffling of papers to the slightest cough, echoed loudly, almost as if amplified. The case involving 6-year-old Amara Daniels had captured the attention of the small community of Lexington, Kentucky, not only because of her young age, but also due to the questions surrounding her custody. On one side, her mother, Vanessa Daniels, sat, her troubled past looming large in the eyes of the law. On the opposite side, the state attorney argued that Amara would be better off in foster care. But Amara was different from other children. She spoke not with the uncertain voice typical of her age, but with a wisdom that made adults pause and listen. That day, as she sat perched on the edge of her chair, her little legs swinging beneath her, she took in the room with wide, curious eyes, observing everything around her. Dressed in a simple yellow dress, her small braids framed her face, and she clutched a well-worn stuffed bunny close to her chest. Judge William Harper, a man in his late 50s with silver hair neatly combed, known for his fairness, presided over the case. He leaned forward slightly, his piercing blue eyes focused intently on Amara. Though he was famed for his calm and composed nature, something about this little girl seemed to affect him deeply, breaking down his usual reserve. The proceedings followed the expected course. The state attorney laid out their case, highlighting Vanessa's history of instability, while Vanessa's lawyer countered, portraying her as a woman striving to make a fresh start. Then it was Amara's turn to speak, and the entire room seemed to prepare for what was to come. The sound of her shoes softly scraping against the polished floor as she made her way to the witness stand was the only noise. Vanessa, sitting across the room, leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly, her lips moving in what appeared to be silent prayer. Judge Harper adjusted his glasses, preparing to hear the child's perspective, though he couldn't have anticipated what would follow. "Amara, do you know why you're here today?" he asked, his tone both gentle and firm. Amara nodded, her big brown eyes locking onto his with a directness that was hard to ignore. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice steady and clear. "I'm here because people don't know where I belong." The judge gave a small nod, impressed by her composure. "And where do you think you belong, Amara?" She paused briefly, as though carefully choosing her words, then spoke with both innocence and certainty. "With my dad." The courtroom collectively held its breath. Judge Harper tilted his head slightly, curious. "And who do you think your dad is?" Amara's gaze never wavered, and with a calm, unwavering certainty, she pointed directly at him. "You are." The silence in the room was so heavy that it seemed to press against everyone. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to vanish. Judge Harper froze, his normally impassive face betraying a hint of shock. The courtroom erupted into murmurs and gasps, the unexpected revelation leaving everyone in disbelief. The court reporter paused, her hands hovering over her keyboard, unsure of how to proceed. Vanessa Daniels, seated at the plaintiff's table, gasped audibly, covering her mouth in shock. Meanwhile, the state attorney leaned back in their chair, their expression a mix of confusion and disbelief. Judge Harper remained frozen, gripping the armrest of his chair as if anchoring himself. His face remained unreadable, but the twitch of his jaw showed the internal turmoil beneath the surface. "Amara," he said, his voice unusually strained, "why do you think I'm your dad?" Her answer was immediate and simple, but devastating. "My mommy told me. She said when I was born, you didn't want to be around, so you went away." Vanessa, visibly shaking, stood up suddenly. "That's not true," she cried out, her voice cracking. "She doesn't know what she's saying." The courtroom deputy quickly stepped forward to calm her, and she reluctantly returned to her seat, her face streaked with tears. Judge Harper took a deep breath, struggling to regain control. "Order," he commanded, his voice firm once more, and the room fell silent, though the tension remained palpable. Everyone now looked at him, waiting to see how he would respond. "Amara," he said gently, turning his attention back to her. "Did your mother tell you anything else about me?" Amara nodded slowly. "She said you're a judge and you help people, but she also said you never came back because you didn't love her." Those words hit like a thunderclap. And for a moment, it felt like the very air in the room had vanished. Vanessa buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably, while Judge Harper remained still, his eyes fixed on Amara. Though his expression remained unreadable, his hands, clasped together on the bench, trembled slightly. The attorneys on both sides began to whisper urgently among themselves, but the conversation seemed distant compared to the weight of Amara's words, which hung in the air like an impending storm. After a long pause, Judge Harper leaned forward, his voice steady, but tinged with something more personal. Amara, what you've said is very serious. I need to know, did your mother tell you this recently, or have you always known? The little girl tilted her head, as if thinking back. She told me a long time ago, she replied. But I didn't understand until I saw you. When I came in today, I just knew you were my dad. Her words struck him deeply, a chord he couldn't ignore. Still, he tried to maintain his composure, clearing his throat before signaling to the attorneys that this would need further investigation. The room fell silent once more, the calm before the storm. It was clear this would take time to process. The courtroom was adjourned, giving everyone a moment to absorb what had just happened. Later, in the solitude of his chambers, Judge Harper leaned back in his chair, the weight of Amara's words pressing down on him like a heavy burden. Could this little girl really be his daughter? His thoughts raced back to a time he long pushed from his mind, his early 30s when his career was just beginning. He had been driven, focused on success, and relationships had always taken a backseat. He recalled a brief but intense romance with a woman named Vanessa Daniels. She had been vibrant and full of life, but their paths had quickly diverged, and she vanished from his world almost as quickly as she had entered it. He had never looked back until now. The next day, Judge Harper called for a closed session, a rare and serious move. The courtroom was almost empty, with only the attorneys, Vanessa and Amara, present. The atmosphere was heavy with unanswered questions. Miss Daniels, Harper began, his voice firm but controlled. I need to ask you directly. Is there any truth to what Amara said yesterday? Vanessa's hands shook as she gripped the edge of the table. Her lawyer whispered something, but she shook her head, signaling that she had to face this herself. She slowly stood, her gaze meeting Harper's. Yes, she said softly, it's true. Her words struck like a lightning bolt, and Harper's stoic expression faltered as the color drained from his face. Why didn't you come to me? He asked, his voice tinged with a hint of hurt despite his usual formality. Vanessa swallowed hard before responding. Because you made it clear what you wanted back then. You had your career, your ambitions, and I didn't want to complicate your life. I thought I was doing the right thing. Harper's tone sharpened. And Amara. Vanessa's shoulders slumped under the weight of his words. I didn't think you'd want her, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. And when things got hard for me, I didn't know how to fix it. I'm sorry. Harper leaned back, his mind in turmoil with emotions, anger, regret, and a strange, newfound sense of responsibility. But there was no time to dwell on it. The focus needed to be on Amara and what was best for her. The attorney suggested a DNA test to confirm the truth, and Harper agreed, though the thought of waiting for the results gnawed at him. In the meantime, he ordered a temporary stay on Amara's foster care placement, allowing her to stay with her mother until everything could be sorted. The following days were filled with paperwork, legal debates, and quiet reflection. Harper couldn't stop wondering what kind of father he could have been if he had known, and whether it was too late to be that father now. When the DNA results came in, they confirmed what everyone had suspected. Judge William Harper was indeed Amara's biological father. The confirmation brought a mix of relief and new questions. The courtroom had become a crucible, where every decision weighed heavily on a child's future. The real challenge, however, was still ahead. As the emotional stakes grew, the courtroom filled again, tension hanging in the air. The case had evolved from a matter of biology to a fight over what kind of future Amara deserved, and who could provide it. Every eye in the room shifted between Harper, sitting with his usual authority, and Vanessa, whose fragile composure seemed to be crumbling under the weight of the moment. Vanessa took the stand, her lawyer guiding her through the challenges she faced after Amara's birth, financial instability, raising a child alone, and the choices that led to legal trouble. Though her voice trembled, She did not shy away from her mistakes. I thought I was protecting her, Vanessa said, her eyes meeting Amara's, who sat beside a guardian. I thought if I kept her away from the chaos, she'd have a better chance. The state's attorney countered sharply, questioning Vanessa's ability to provide a safe environment. Miss Daniels, you've demonstrated a pattern of instability. How can you prove you can care for your daughter now? Vanessa hesitated, her confidence shaken. Looking at Amara, she said softly, "She's my world, and I'll fight every day to prove I can be the mother she deserves." Then it was Harper's turn. Despite still presiding over the case, his personal involvement blurred the lines of professionalism. At his lawyer's suggestion, he took the stand, leaving the gavel behind for the first time in his career. The room held its breath as Harper spoke of his younger years, his ambition, and his ignorance of Vanessa's pregnancy. "If I had known," he said, his voice breaking, "I wouldn't have walked away. I wasn't ready for a family back then, but I would have tried. I would have been there." His gaze shifted to Amara, who watched him intently with wide eyes. "And now that I know," he continued, "I'll do whatever it takes to make up for the time I've lost." The cross-examination was intense, the state's attorney immediately questioning Harper's intentions. "Judge Harper, you've had no contact with this child for 6 years. Do you really think stepping into her life now is in her best interest?" Harper paused, taking a deep breath. "I don't just believe it," he said firmly. "I know it. Amara deserves stability, love, and someone who will fight for her no matter what. If that means proving myself every day, I will." The room fell silent, save for the scribbling of the court reporter. The judge presiding over the case, Leonard Shaw, finally spoke. "This is an extraordinary situation," he said gravely. "The law prioritizes the child's welfare above all else. I'll hear from the person this affects most." All eyes turned to Amara, who hesitated, clutching her stuffed bunny tightly. Her guardian knelt beside her, whispering something that made Amara nod. Slowly, she made her way to the witness stand, her small frame dwarfed by the towering furniture. "Amara," Judge Shaw said gently, "do you understand why you're here today?" "Yes, sir," she replied softly. "You're trying to figure out where I should live." "And where do you want to live?" he asked, his tone gentle but firm. Amara glanced between Vanessa and Harper. After a brief pause, she said, "I want to live with both of them." Surprise rippled through the courtroom, murmurs breaking out despite the judge's command for order. Vanessa looked stunned, and Harper's usually composed face softened with what seemed like hope. "But I know that's not how it works," Amara added, her voice carrying the wisdom far beyond her years. "I just want to feel safe and loved." Her words hit harder than any argument or testimony. Simple and pure, they cut through the noise of the legal battle, leaving everyone with one question. How could they honor her request in a world bound by rules? The courtroom reconvened the next day, the tension palpable. Judge Shaw prepared to deliver his verdict, with all eyes on him. He began by acknowledging the complexity of the case. At its core, he said, "This is about a little girl who deserves a stable, loving home. It's about balancing her need for security with the opportunity to know her father, who has only recently come into her life." After reviewing all the evidence and considering Amara's own wishes, Judge Shaw continued, "This court has reached a decision." Vanessa gripped the table, her knuckles white. Harper sat still, his hands folded. Amara, too young to understand the gravity of the moment, clutched her bunny and gazed up at the judge. "It is the court's ruling," Shaw declared, "that Amara Daniels will remain in the custody of her mother, Vanessa Daniels. However, the court recognizes the importance of Amara developing a relationship with her biological father. Therefore, Judge William Harper is granted joint custody with structured visitation and shared responsibilities." The courtroom murmured in surprise as the verdict settled in. Vanessa exhaled shakily, tears flowing freely. Harper's face softened, a mix of relief and determination. Judge Shaw wasn't finished. "This decision is not an end, but a beginning. It is a chance for two parents to set aside their past and work together for the best interest of the child they share." As the proceedings concluded, Harper approached Vanessa outside the courtroom. For a moment, they stood silently, Two people with a complicated history now bound by something greater. Finally, Harper extended his hand for Amara. Vanessa hesitated, then took his hand. Amara, clutching her bunny, watched them with a smile, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. For the first time, she had both her parents by her side, and her future seemed a little brighter. The story doesn't end here. It's a reminder that life is messy and full of second chances.